Good evening, everyone, and good morning in Athens to Eleni, our guest speaker for this evening here in Sydney. Hello and welcome to the Committee for Sydney's Global Conversation. I'm Kerry Robinson, I'm the CEO of Blacktown City Council, and it's my great pleasure to be here with you today to speak with Eleni Myrivili, Athens Chief Heat Officer. I'd like to start, as we always do, by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we are meeting. I'm on the land of the Darug people and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging for their custodianship of our land. The Committee for Sydney would also like to acknowledge and thank our Innovation Fund partners for their ongoing support, their great support. Campbelltown City Council, Dexus, International Convention Centre Sydney, McKinsey & Company, Western Sydney Uni, Sydney Uni, and Jones Lang LaSalle. Dr. Eleni Myrivili is Athens and indeed Europe's very first Chief Heat Officer, one of a small cohort of Chief Heat Officers connected through a new global campaign on extreme heat, which is led by the Atlantic Council's Resilience Centre. Now I'm going to go into Eleni's background. She's one of the most credentialed people I've ever had the pleasure of meeting. She's quite extraordinary. She has served as Athens Deputy Mayor for 2.5 years and as Chief Resilience Officer. She co-chairs the Global Steering Committee of the Resilient Sydneys Network, formerly the 100 Resilient Sydneys. And she has a PhD in social anthropology from Columbia University. In short, she's both a powerhouse of action and has a rich perspective on both the issues of urban heat and the challenges and how to solve them. One of the reasons I'm so pleased that she's here is extreme heat is an increasingly urgent problem. And we know about that in Australia. It's our most deadly natural hazard, more so, in fact, than bushfires, floods, and others. A hazard, of course, that you know is profound here in Western Sydney. You'll all remember the extreme heat and the droughts of the past few years. We're having a wet year, El Niño. But of course, the heat which led to the terrific bushfires which we had in 2019, which are burnt into our memories. And this year, much of Europe has had one of the hottest summers on record. And in Canada, we've had reports of heat waves killing hundreds of people across a weekend. This past August, residents of Athens were told to flee their homes as fires ravaged the hills on the outskirts of the city and turned the skies red, raining ash down on the city's residents. That might sound familiar, and we've had that on occasion. And I can remember very vividly back in 1994, exactly that, ash raining from the sky in the inner suburbs of Sydney. And pre-COVID, we were battling some of the most destructive bushfires which have ever occurred across our country. Some of you might be surprised that indeed, for a number of reasons, there's quite a lot of parallels between Athens and Sydney. They're cities of roughly the same size, and they're cities which are on a coast, in a basin, which affects very strongly their climate, their localized climate, close to the coast, away from the coast. Eleni and I are going to talk about this more, but before we do, Eleni's going to work through a presentation and give us some of her great insight. And as she does, please submit the questions that you might have into the Q&A function, which is at the bottom of your screen. So now it's my pleasure to hand over to Eleni. Thank you very much, Eleni.
Kelly, this has been one of the most kind and generous introductions I've ever had. So thank you so much. And thanks the Committee for Sydney for having me. I will just start with the presentation just to give you a little bit of background about Athens, and then continue with the discussion with Kelly, which will be probably the most interesting part. So I also want to acknowledge that Sydney has done amazing work for heat. And I almost feel a little bit embarrassed to be presenting things to you, because Sydney is one of the great cities that I admire and I copy, and I stand on the work that they've done to kind of be working on heat as well. So I just wanted to start by saying that. So Athens is in this little peninsula of Greece that kind of sticks out, and it's one among 38 municipalities that creates the metropolitan area of Athens. It is surrounded by mountains. It's very densely built and inhabited. It's actually the most densely built and inhabited city in Europe after Paris. Here you can, it's also the largest municipality. Here you can see the space that it occupies. It's the largest municipality in Greece. It is inhabited by about a little bit less than 700,000 people, but it actually has a lot of footwork every day. It's used by a couple of million people. Again, this is kind of like the dense, you can see the density and also the fact that there's green on the eastern side and less on the western side already from just looking at it. This is a little bit of a sense of what it looks like, and a little bit from the top. It's, as I said, it's very densely built, and it's extremely cemented. It has more these days. It's close to 80% the non-permeable surfaces in the city. We've managed successfully to eliminate all of the water, all of the rivers and the streams that used to be part of this whole valley, or whatever it is, like this whole catchment, I suppose, area before hitting the sea. It's a city that's very anarchically built, because it suddenly exploded from around 50,000 people in the early 1900s to a few million by the late 1900s. So within 4 or 5 decades, there was an extraordinary explosion of building. And as you can see here, there's a small percentage of green per person. And also it's extremely unevenly distributed within the city. The western side and southern side has the big green areas, and the the southeastern side has the most green areas, and the northwestern and western side doesn't. As we know, usually if you look at any city kind of from the top, you can tell where the socioeconomically, what is the lay of the land. So you can tell from just looking at where the green areas are, where the middle class and upper class kind of neighborhoods are. And then in the areas that don't have any trees, it's usually the lower class and the most kind of vulnerable populations that live there. We started together with Sydney, I think the same year in 2016, to work together in this network of cities and try to create our resilience strategy, which was the first thing that all of 100 cities did. And the first thing that we did is talking with people from the bottom up to figure out what the shocks and stresses were for Athens. And climate change and heat waves, the urban heat island, flash floods, peri-urban fires, drought, was one of the main kind of shocks that we talked about, that people were conscious of and wanted to kind of have high in the list. And also, there was a lot of discussion when we were doing that, whether it was going to be under shocks or stresses. So we always kind of thought of it as both a shock and a stress, even though we put it under shock, mostly to persuade the politicians to do more things about it. We ended up having our resilience strategy launched in 2030 with 4 pillars: open city, green city, proactive city, and vibrant city. And we started by having an adaptation action plan, which mostly focused on adaptation to heat, which had about 29 actions in different areas to respond to the rising urban temperatures. We also had a very specific action that was targeted towards the issue of energy poverty. Which at the time in 2016, 2017, reached up to 25% of the population of Athens, which of course makes things harder during issues of heat. We also in the 2019 and 2018, there were two seminal studies that came out that helped us again kind of persuade the mayor and the city council, which at the time thought that we were a little crazy to be talking about extreme heat as a big issue. One was from Newcastle, that among 571 European cities considered Athens as the single greatest, that will have the single greatest impact from heat waves. And Moody's actually said that unless Athens does something about to adapt to heat, it's going to suffer. Its credit rating is going to suffer from it. We also have the prognostics for what's going to be happening with rising heat in our city has been particularly ominous, because we expect that because of this part of the world, the Eastern Mediterranean is expected to be particularly vulnerable to global warming. We expect in Greece to have to go up to 2 degrees to 3.8 degrees Celsius by the middle of the century, which means that in the next couple of decades, we expect 15 to 20 extra days of heat waves on average per summer, and a decrease of rainfall to about 12%. We have a terrible urban heat island. Oops, I don't know, it got stuck. Wait, there we go. We have a terrible urban heat island that goes up to 10 degrees between the center of the city and the suburbs. And you can see some data here. We have about 200 deaths per year from heat related to heat. The electricity, of course, increases, commercial activity decreases, and the city is a very vibrant city and very dynamic city that is mostly lives outdoors. So it's a bit of an issue, because when we have high temperatures, everybody kind of closes in. So the city kind of feels like it totally dies down. And then we also have these other issues which have to do with insects attacking our trees because of the temperatures rising, and of course, the peri-urban wildfires that we've been dealing with. But the summer of 2021 was really kind of a turning point. And we had heat going up to 45 degrees Celsius for a couple of days in Athens, and it reached, I think, 47.8 in other parts of Greece. And finally, again, through kind of extrapolation of data, we figured out through Eurostat that we had an excess of 2,300 deaths in a period of 2.5 weeks that were extra deaths, surplus deaths, again, after you kind of take out the coronavirus victims. One of the things that we had to do, and of course cities kind of have to do when we begin to start kind of figuring out what kind of policies and we have to do, is to map out the heat and map out vulnerability and exposure. So in 2016, we did these maps where in the center you see kind of a not very granular at all map about one heat wave and where the pressures are of the heat in the city. And to the left, we see percentage of children throughout the territory of the city, and on the right, the below poverty, we managed to, through a special program for applying for food, we got them zip codes and kind of mapped out the people that were below the poverty line. Today, we managed to, we ordered and have a much better map that has a real granular data that goes down to heat per block, per city block. And even though it looks blue and green, if you look at the ledger, it's actually from 35 to 45 degrees, and it's it's surface temperatures, which are taken back. They are kind of the mean temperatures for 5 years back. Per block. But of course, we need to correlate this to demographic data and income distribution and job distribution and air condition penetration, which we're still waiting for, because we have a census coming up. We have 2000, every 10 years we have a census. So 2021 was the year of the census. So we're expecting the results in a few months to correlate all this. We recently did we're updating our climate action plan, which has like a whole series of things which probably will look familiar to you, from mitigation and adaptation. And finally, I should kind of finish by saying what are the three main kind of buckets or three main pillars of actions that we're planning right now for heat. And the first one has to do with awareness raising. The second one with emergency response plan, with building an emergency response plan. And the third one is with, generally cooling the city, which of course has to do with mostly with bringing nature-based solutions and bringing much more green into the city. So the first one, the awareness raising actions, have to do, we have decided that one of the main things, because heat is something that is still not considered a big issue, and people are not really aware of the dangers that heat brings, exactly because it's difficult to communicate, exactly because it's, as everybody calls it these days, the silent killer. We have to make it more visible, and we have to really make people understand exactly what kind of dangers are linked to it. So we think that it's a really crucial point to start categorizing heat waves, as well as naming them. But the most important, I mean, naming is also important, but we believe that the most important thing that will create a real sea change is actually categorizing heat waves. And we're going to do this coming summer for the first time, correlating meteorological data with health data. So it's not just that, because heat waves are very idiosyncratic, and they very much have to do with where they happen and when they happen and what are the conditions under which they happen. A lot of scientists have been very hesitant about categorizing them. So this is, we're using a scientist from Athens with scientists from the Atlantic Council, like different people that have developed a specific methodology that actually uses some of the science that comes out of Sydney, I believe, in also making part of the methodology that they're using, this whole idea that you take into consideration also what was the temperature 30 days before the actual heat wave, which is, I don't remember, but it's a scientist from Australia that names this particular way of measuring heat waves. So this is one, because we really believe that this will be a breakthrough for people in the media to be able to talk about specific categories and linking how dangerous each heat wave is for the city of Athens or for the specific place that's happening, and putting into effect different measures that can be helping and preventing more morbidity and mortality. The other thing that we've developed for several years now is the Extrema Global, it's called these days, which is like an app that tells you your personalized risk based on where you are in the city. And the city has to develop on a map and put on a map the places where it can give shelter for the vulnerable populations and what is the best way of giving shelter to them. The second, I mean, it's a long discussion that we can discuss about this, but because time is limited, I'm going to go to the second one, which is the emergency response plan, which we have started doing these intensive workshops with a lot of different stakeholders coming together. We have the last one on the 14th of December, coming together and figuring out what kind of policies, also bringing ideas from heat response plans from all around the world, different cities, because these networks, like the Resilient Cities Network, are which has a community of practice on heat, and other networks like C40, Italy, etc., where the cities meet and compare their work, are really, really valuable for us to assess what we're doing and figure out what the best ways of going about this. So we take a lot of this type of information and work it through and see what would work for Athens. And finally, and this is my last slide, we are doing a lot of, we're not doing enough. It should be much, much more of bringing nature into the city with doing green corridors, supporting the existing, our existing green areas, creating water fountains around the city, doing et cetera, but the main project is this that we're doing exactly because, unlike Sydney, we haven't managed to go beyond the municipality of Athens in bringing together all of the different municipalities and creating resilient strategies for all municipalities, and actually doing a more cohesive and comprehensive plan for the whole of the metropolitan area. This is one of the actions that we are doing that with. At least we are pulling together 10 different municipalities that are making use of an extraordinary aqueduct, which is called Hadrian's Aqueduct, that was built in 150 after Christ, so during the Roman years, and it's 25 kilometers. It's all underground. It's an incredible feat, engineering feat, that brought water into the city, and it hasn't been used now. It kind of still has water in it, mostly kind of taking it out of the aquifer under the city and throwing it into the sewage. So we have a big plan to use it for the first time after a very long time to support and renew different parts of the city around it. So it's going to be like a whole strategy of using the Hadrian Aqueduct to create a large district of cooler and greener Athens. And with this note, I'm going to stop. I'm hoping I didn't take too much of your time. Thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Thank you, Eleni. And I'm struggling to turn my camera on for reasons that I do not know. Anyway, I'll talk at you, notwithstanding you can't see me. Really interested in some of the similarities between Athens and Sydney. Cities about the same size, cities in a basin. Really interesting. When I look at Sydney, there's very great differences between the effect of heat on people who live near the coast because of a sea breeze, which cools things down generally in summer, and people who are away from the coast. And the people who are away from the coast typically have lesser incomes, have more vulnerabilities health-wise. Is it similar in Athens? Tell me a bit more about the geography of Athens and the distribution of population.
So the distribution of population is, here you are. So the distribution of population is, we have the southern suburbs, which are the suburbs close to the sea, which indeed are more upper class, middle or upper class, mostly. We also have the northern suburbs, which are closer to the mountains, north and northeast, which are also the most expensive and the most kind of affluent suburbs. The lower areas and the most socioeconomically vulnerable areas are on the west of the city and going up to the west side of the mountains. And I think this is part of the fact that this is the lowest part of the how did you call it, Kelly? Not a valley. What word did you use?
Plain.
Plain.
Yeah.
Of the plain or the plateau. So it's the lowest part of the plateau, actually. It's near what used to be a river, which now is an enormous highway, and it's built extremely densely, and there's never been a lot of money spent for infrastructure in those areas, for serious infrastructure. So it's a large part of Athens, and it's overly built.
We sort of look at Europe in awe because in Australia, we've had some very muddled politics for the last decade. And for various political reasons, it's been very hard to get a coalition of both sides of politics to agree that there needed to be much action or any action in relation to climate change. And we sit here and look at what is going on in Europe, Germany, and other places where there's very, very significant commitment to very substantial change, which is going to transform their economies. So how has it been difficult for you in Athens to build a coalition of people who see the need for change?
Very much so. We are also in awe of Europe. In the sense that we have been very preoccupied with problems in Greece, like mostly our economic recession and issues with refugees, and all of these types of politics have absolutely 100% occupied public discourse for the last couple of decades, and none of the politicians have been paying any serious, I mean, in the government, it wasn't even a discussion. It hasn't really been a part of the discussion in central politics at all for the last couple of decades, and in city government also. It was me and one more person that had these types of agendas for many years. So as you're saying, Kelly, it's been really hard to talk about this and have people take it seriously and not think that it was an excess and a luxury thing to be discussing about policies that had to do with climate change. This has changed, and it has changed dramatically this last couple of years, exactly because of the large climate crisis that we've had, enormous floods, these heat waves, the fires, and they go on, and it seems like we're not getting any respite from it. And but Europe has been like for it because it decided to go for the Green Deal, which was it was fantastic. I was in the Green Party about 10 years ago or so, or even more. And we were really discussing about the Green Deal and thinking it was like a dream. We were proposing it for the European Green through the European Green Party, but it seemed like a really remote kind of. And now it's actually the law of the land, which is amazing, and it's actually making a very big difference because it means that there's funding and that Greece can actually get funding for different policies that are and different initiatives and works that are really important. But it pushes the envelope, but still you need people to understand that this is important, and also to have the capacity to absorb these funds in the right kind of ways and know how to do things, which is another issue, because we have the architects, the engineers, etc. Whether they're in the public sector or the private sector, they are used to doing things in a totally different way, and this will take a while to change, but it has to change really fast. So I wanted to ask you about how difficult it has been, you being, in the political kind of, in the leadership role, how hard has it been for Blacktown to kind of discuss and have these as a priority?
I think that the concern about heat in Australia is very strongly linked to bushfires. Bushfires are a real threat. It's a human threat. Just as Athens is surrounded by hills, Sydney is surrounded by national parks and hills. And when you see a glow on the horizon, there's this real perception of, I've got to do something. And what we had was tremendous string of bushfires down the east coast of Australia in one season, all driven by heat. And there is a change in attitude that goes with drought in Australia. Drought leads to bushfire, excess heat leads to bushfire.
It's exactly, no, I don't want to interrupt you. I want you to continue. I just wanted to say it's exactly the same. I mean, the bushfires is what made it visible for people, and it made politicians move. That was the critical difference. But go ahead.
And then there has been some politics, left versus right, with the left here wanting change in climate and action to reduce CO2 and so forth, and the right being less inclined to that. I'll be polite. But some of the councils that band together in Western Sydney, an organisation called Wesrock, Western Sydney Regional Organisation of Councils, which I know that you're aware of some of their work, have taken it on board as a very serious issue, because when you go back to the Resilient Sydney work, it is the most stressful thing for the community. It generates the most amount of deaths of people, more than any other natural event. And so Wesrock has actually led the charge, and the councils have been on board, the member councils, the 10 of them, have been on board with that work. And it has been a great piece of work where Wesrock has coalesced not only the member councils, but other councils to work collaboratively to come up with a whole range of analysis, then solutions for some of those problems. And they come back to some very simple pillars, just as you've pointed to. More water in the environment, more trees will help keep things cool, a little bit better thinking about urban design so that we've got space for trees. We're thinking more about hot breezes and cool breezes and so forth. It's not rocket science. The implementation of it, to your point, is really, really difficult. We're in a situation at the moment of having a heap of grant money and finding the resources to actually go and implement the work and find contractors to plant hundreds of thousands of trees when you want to do it is a bit of a challenge. Lenio, how is your role? I'm really fascinated by the governance, how your role works within the council, in the broader community. And you mentioned that City of Athens has had to go alone and perhaps the surrounding councils have been less interested. How does all of that sort of work?
That's a hard question. So we have elections every 5 years. We have in big cities, we have 50 people that are in the create the city council, and from the people that are voted on the majority that vote the mayor, some of them are chosen to be deputy mayors. So when I used to be chief resilient officer, eventually I also managed to get the position of deputy mayor for urban nature and climate adaptation. So that gave me a lot of authority to do a lot of things and start a lot of the work that is continued right now, especially kind of the green corridors and the blue-green infrastructure stuff. So now my position as a chief heat officer is I already was kept by the new mayor that came into power in 2019 as an advisor on issues of climate and resilience. So when they decided to kind of create this position together with the Atlantic Council, Athens decided to create this position of chief heat officer. The mayor insisted that I have it, even though I wanted it to be part of the administration of the, like somebody within the administration of the municipality, so it can stay on, because an advisor is an advisor, you know, today, but he's gone to, or she's gone tomorrow. So, but they insisted that I do it, and I accepted to do it at least as an interim period, so that there's more capacity built within the city, so somebody else can do it. But what I've been trying to do, as I kind of quickly mentioned in the presentation, is to kind of go beyond also the borders of the municipality. So I'm talking with the regional government to kind of create this integrated strategic plan for these 10 different municipalities around the aqueduct. I'm also discussing with the new Ministry of Climate Change and trying to kind of streamline the policies that we're doing on heat with different policies that they can kind of decide on, which the city doesn't have authority on, as well as kind of doing things very much at the bottom, like creating a lot of neighborhood and different kind of stakeholder workshops to work, especially on the preparedness issues. I want to say, like, for example, the one thing that I always discuss, which I think is kind of amazing that Sydney has done, is that there was an agreement made with energy providers, so that when the temperatures go above a specific number, the energy providers take capacity away from the industrial sector and move it to the residential sector, which is brilliant. And it's kind of a great agreement, and it probably saves a lot of lives and you know, avoids blackouts. So this is something that, for example, has to be done on the level of the ministry and of central government. And this is the types of discussions that I'm having at the ministry level. So I'm working a little bit like a free agent with the attachment to the city. So yeah. I do have a position in the city as an advisor position. And I also have the backup of the Atlantic Council Resilience Center. So I'm kind of trying to do things and I'm losing a lot of sleep and worrying a lot about how effective I'm going to be.
Lenio, Nick Chapman's given us a question here. Thank you very much, Nick. And it goes to, you mentioned how the community has changed its attitude and might be seeing that there's a need for action. Nick's question is, how do you get the community to accept the action? How do you retrofit streets, take parking away, make space for greenery, when that means that people don't have a parking space or whatever? So how some of the implementation panned out, Lenio?
Well, this is a really big question, because it's really difficult to persuade Athenians that it's going to, you know, that it's really that heat is really dangerous, that climate has changed, and it's a city that has been always dealing with heat. So it's, you know, they think it's normal. You know, one more hot summer, what's the big deal with a little bit more heat wave? It's not. There isn't enough visibility of how many deaths are related to heat. There isn't enough visibility of how many people go to hospitals and how many work-related accidents we have during heat. So this has to get become much more visible, has to be talked and be a larger part of the discourse. And this is part of it. It also has to kind of be, you have to work a lot with neighborhoods and from the bottom up, which again, you guys know, because you've been working a lot. You have kind of, as Kerry has mentioned, resilience, and because we had a little chat yesterday, resilience has a lot to do with social resilience for Sydney, and we get that. I mean, creating networks of citizens that can help each other and make sure that there is kind of social cohesion, specifically in neighborhoods, is really important. So you have to go at that level and discuss with people and figure out where they get their information, what kind of information they get, how can you influence this type their activity, which is what you're asking, which is the hardest thing. You have to find the right kind of constituencies that are willing to back you up, and you have to really go head on with the constituencies that are going to be screaming and fighting and throwing tomatoes at you. And that means that you have to have a politician and a mayor that is willing to take the heat. And that's really not easy. And the quality of our politicians, exactly because a lot of people take a lot of heat, and the attacks are more and more vicious towards the politicians. Less normal people want to be in the political arena. So I think that this is a big issue, because we really need brave and enlightened leadership, and we have to really choose our leaders carefully. And that's not simple. And so it's a back and forth thing. You have to make sure that you have the backing of specific constituencies that understand that it's to their benefit, and take them on your side and make sure that they have your back to a large extent, and then really have the guts to go, and the stomach to really take the heat.
In Sydney, there's been some very strong advocacy by the Green movement, seeking to have councils declare a climate emergency, and many councils have, and that then gives a platform for the need for action, which has been very, very helpful when we talk to our council.
So tell me a little more about that. What do they want the council members to do? What do they ask the council members to do?
Very much a PR and political movement, which asked individual mayors and badgered individual councillors to declare a climate emergency. Now, the definition of climate emergency was all a bit vague. There was a request to take a certain set of actions, but getting the councillors simply to focus on the issue. And the Green movement was very strong for about 3 months in badgering, hounding individual councillors to say, you need to do this, it's important, etc., etc. In our case, and in many councils in Sydney that have declared a climate emergency, having done that, it's a platform that then needs to be satisfied. You've just declared a climate emergency, you can't ignore it then. And it's been very, very valuable in doing that. I'll just pick out, Lenio, some of the comments and the questions that might relate to some of your Athens situation. The development controls on the fringe, the new housing which is happening on the fringe of Sydney, are set by the Department of Planning. And they allow very small lots down to 300 square metres. So we end up with what you've got, a very dense form of housing, very little outdoor space, not enough backyard or front yard on a block to actually plant a decent tree. The market, for some bizarre reason, has had a preference for black roofs. And so we're creating these new suburbs, sometimes on cleared farming land, in some places clearing timbered land in order to put the houses on. So I'm wondering what the stock of new housing which might be being built in Athens, is it climate responsive, and how are you trying to make it climate responsive?
So again, this is the discussion that we're having on the level of ministry, because it's these types of directions are from government level that have to happen. I was reading recently that black roofs are getting to be illegal. There's a direction against them, so that's great. we don't have very much development at the moment, but they're trying to, of course, there's an effort always to have more development and find new places to build in. Right now, my concern is more within the center of Athens and trying to figure out how to remove cars from the city and from buildings. So we have this law. We were recently discussing, for example, this is an example. We're recently discussing this law that we have that they have for each new building, you have to create one position of parking per apartment, which often, again, even though we have a percentage of space for open space and green is kind of within the building regulations, it often gets kind of co-opted by the whole parking issue of allotting spaces for cars. So there's a very big discussion right now that started from architecture, different architectural offices, and one actually that is related, that is an Australian Greek architecture office that started this discussion, which has to do with the fact, what if we try to if we, as even if the developers give to the building 2 electric cars and the stations for charging, could that be what's it called? Could that kind of lift the requirement for spaces for cars in each building, which would also allow free space, more free space for green and for kind of open spaces for each building that's built, each new building that's built in the center of the city, which is very important. So this is like a discussion that is happening, which has the logic that we don't have the time to kind of have a normal transition away from fossil fuel, start thinking of totally different ways of dealing with mobility that moves away from ownership and from single usage to different ways of car sharing and different ways of mobility and commuting if we want this city to survive. So this is a discussion that's taking place, and it will take, I think, a while before these ideas come about, but there is an urgency. So people are starting to think a little bit out of the box more than they used to in the past. And the European Union, as you mentioned, is helping, because it might, it could support different, like, for example, changing the fleet or of different things, or, we can actually get funding for these types of shifts.
You mentioned earlier the challenge of some of the professions, and I won't call out engineers, but I will call out engineers because they're a problem. We have a set of rules about the standards for roads. And one of those rules, which is national and includes New Zealand, is on a road with a certain speed limit above 60 kilometres an hour, 60 or above, you can't have trees, because they're dangerous. The cars are going to run into them, and we've got a goal of 0 road deaths, and the trees conflict with the goal of 0 road deaths. So I just call out as an example, have you found that as you start to work on some of the implementation, what are some of the challenges you found, the technical challenges that you've needed to find solutions to?
Tons. There's like, there's, I mean, there's always, there totally unexpected things that, because I mean, my background is, I'm an anthropologist. So I came into into learning about cities by being elected into city government and learning things by kind of doing a strategy, a resilient strategy. So I keep discovering these strange things that that have to do with urban planning. I think the largest issue for us is the breakup of authorities for that kind of is split between different levels of government for dealing with one thing in the public space. So different roads are the responsibility of different levels of government. The pavements belong to, like, part of the pavement belongs to this authority, another part of the pavement belongs to another authority, creating like like deciding that the street will be pedestrianized needs a lot of different levels of governmental decrees. I mean, it's just these like multiplicity and fragmentation of authority to take decisions and change things, I think, is the largest impediment that we have found. Somehow I really we also part of the problem is that we don't have a metropolitan authority. Which is this would be really a large step forward that actually pulls together different types of decisions and mandates that now are broken up between the different municipalities, the region, and the government. So this would really be an incredible move forward, I believe. I don't know, do you have a metropolitan level governance?
We have about 35 councils, roughly the same number as you have across the metropolitan area, but we don't have an overarching council. We have the Greater Sydney Commission, which is an instrument of the state government, did fall under the Department of Planning, which has a metropolitan strategy and then planning strategies for 5 districts. And the council's planning controls need to match up with the district level plans. And that's a work in progress. But I think the urban heat matters have come along after that was put in place, more recently in the last couple of years. And there's some policy goals within that stuff, but not enough in terms of the actual implementation, or it's left to the councils in terms of the implementation. But so that's strength. Now, in terms of the governance, Lenio, those councils, I'm still interested in those councils that are around the central city. Are all of them, so why are they not coming on board? Or are they coming on board? Or are their mayors opposed? Is it politics? Is it budget? What is it? What are the impediments?
So different mayors belong to different political parties. So there's a lot of tension there. There is also there's also different the way that the monies are allocated also are separate and have to do with each kind of municipality. I don't think that there's ever been an effort to bring everybody together. It needs an effort, and it never really took place in a serious way. I believe that it is possible. And I think that the work that Resilient Sydney did to actually put the effort in for several years to bring everybody on board and to create the different resilient strategies and start creating a common language and a common discourse and a common sense of goals and a vision for the Greater Sydney area, I think is just a matter of somebody really putting in the legwork and putting in the effort to pull everybody together. And I think that maybe the creation of the Ministry of Climate Change, which we're in a strange kind of time because we have a right-wing government, kind of center-right government on all levels of government for the first time after a long time. So it's the city government, the regional government, and the central government are all center-right. And believe it or not, they are doing quite a lot of things about climate, which the previous government, which was a left-wing government, which I thought would be much more proactive in issues of climate, didn't do. But again, you know, it's now that we're having more and more extreme weather phenomena. So, you know, the politician, I mean, there's more mobilization. But anyway, it's just as a Green, it was really kind of a shock to realize that the more initiatives and more political decision making happened during the right-wing government than the left government. And that's just a weird little note.
So you mentioned the need for a driving force, and we couldn't finish this conversation without thanking Monica Baroni, the CEO of Sydney City, Beck Dawson, the Chief Resilient Officer, Clover Moore, the Lord Mayor, and Sydney City Council for hosting the 100 Resilient Cities to start with and driving that through. And I know, because I do a bit of work with Monica, just how hard it is to get 35 mayors together, even when they're going to have their picture taken, which they love. It's just really, really hard grind. So they have done a tremendous amount of work in helping Sydney move forward on that front, and due thanks to them. And
absolutely. And Kerry, it's recognized around the world. I just want to tell you that I know in Athens that they did this, and you know, we know, cities know that you guys have taken the time and put this effort in, and we are in awe of you guys. So don't think that it's not getting acknowledged and we don't, you know, think very highly of you.
Thank you. That's flattering when we sit here and we've got a federal government which is telling us that it wants to build a new coal-fired powered station, and we look at Norway, which is selling electric cars and so forth. It's a muddled world that we have. I do also want to pay credit once again to the work of Wesrock in Western Sydney. Tremendous work, the cool suburbs work that they've done. For those of you online who are interested in this topic, it's some of the best work from around the world. Look at Wesrock's cool suburb stuff. It's really, really fantastic. A little anecdote to perhaps for me to finish on. You mentioned sort of heat refuges and dealing with vulnerable people. And we had some junior staff here propose that, oh, we're going to go and get these vulnerable people and we're going to take them to places that are air conditioned. Conceptually, fantastic. Yeah. So who's going to do this? Well, some junior female staff are going to have a bus and drive around and do it. And so these vulnerable people, just what vulnerabilities do they have? How many of them have addictions? How many of them have mental health problems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? It's when you get down, it becomes very granular, and the work to actually make it work person by person is really extraordinarily challenging. If you've got people with health problems, aged people, mental health problems, you can't just pick them up and put them in a box and say, there you go, you'll be fine, it's air conditioned. You know, so right. It needs a lot of working through.
That's right.
Eleni, our time is up. It's been absolutely wonderful to speak with you. I've loved our 2 chats now. I've learnt so much. And thank you very, very much on behalf of the Committee for Sydney and all of the sponsors tonight. Thank you so much for your time. It's really greatly appreciated. Thanks.